Imagine standing in a crowded medieval square, the air thick with the smell of smoke, sweat, and fear. Before you, a man is tied to a wooden frame, his body stretched until tendons snap like violin strings. The crowd cheers. Children sit on their father's shoulders. Priests chant prayers, and yet, this is not a carnival. This is justice. In the Middle Ages, death was not enough. Criminals had to suffer publicly, slowly, and with creativity so horrifying, it defies imagination. Here, punishment was theater, cruelty was law, and the executioner was both feared and admired. What you're about to hear will disturb you. Because these methods were not whispered myths, they were real. They were witnessed, documented, celebrated. This is not just history. It is a journey into the darkest corners of the human mind. This is the terrifying story of pain power. To understand medieval execution, you must first understand the world in which it thrived. Medieval Europe was not governed by modern law codes or rational courts. Justice was divine, and punishment was theater. The authorities believed that the body of the criminal was a canvas upon which society could paint its moral lessons. Every lash, every broken bone, every scream became a message. Sin leads to suffering, rebellion leads to ruin. Public execution was a ritual as sacred as Mass. Town criers announced the date, markets shut down, and entire villages gathered to watch. It wasn't simply about killing the guilty. It was about reaffirming order, terrifying the crowd into obedience, and showing the power of the throne and the church. In a time when literacy was rare, pain itself became the language of law. The simplest punishments already carried cruelty. Hanging, for instance, was never quick. A well-tied noose today snaps the neck instantly. In the Middle Ages, the rope was often short. The condemned strangled slowly, their legs kicking wildly for minutes before finally succumbing to asphyxiation. The audience would watch as eyes bulged and tongues swelled, the body convulsing until life drained away. If mercy was shown, it was in the form of the executioner pulling down on the legs to hasten death, but mercy was rarely given. Beheadings, often thought of as clean executions, were rarely clean. The axe was dull, the executioner nervous, the condemned often thrashing in fear. One chronicler wrote of an English noble whose execution required 5 strikes before his head finally toppled from his shoulders. Blood sprayed across the platform, soaking the straw, while the crowd alternated between gasps and cheers. A single, swift stroke was considered an act of grace. More often, it was a drawn-out butchery. But these were only the beginnings. For crimes considered more severe, heresy, treason, witchcraft, simple death was not enough. The guilty had to become examples. Their agony turned into a public warning carved into flesh. To merely kill was too kind. The punishment had to be memorable, unforgettable, terrifying. And so came the birth of execution as art. Punishments so grotesque that people remembered them for generations. Punishments that turned the human body into a spectacle of horror, where death was the final curtain in a long performance of agony. One such method was the breaking wheel, a device so feared that its very name carried dread across Europe. The condemned was tied to a massive wooden wheel. The executioner then took an iron bar and shattered the victim's limbs, one by one, weaving the broken body between the spokes until they resembled a twisted spider caught in its web. Sometimes the wheel was raised on a pole, leaving the victim to die slowly of shock, thirst, or the crows that pecked at their still-living flesh. Death could take days, the body a grotesque monument to punishment. Why such horror? Because the wheel was not just execution. It was theater, politics, and religion all in one. The church declared that criminals were damned, their suffering proof of divine justice. Kings and lords used it to intimidate their subjects. And the people, ordinary men, women, and children came to watch, not out of cruelty alone, but because this was their only form of mass entertainment. Pain, in the medieval world, was not hidden. It was celebrated. Yet, as terrifying as the wheel was, it was only a prelude to far darker methods still to come. If the first section of medieval justice was designed to frighten, the second was designed to destroy. For the Middle Ages developed not just tools of death, but instruments of agony. Execution became a carefully staged process, one where the victim's body was broken down piece by piece, their cries echoing across the square as both punishment and performance. Consider the Iron Maiden, perhaps the most infamous symbol of medieval cruelty. Though historians debate its frequent use, the idea itself captures the medieval mind. A tall coffin, shaped like a woman, lined with spikes on the inside. The condemned was shut within, their flesh pierced in dozens of places, bleeding out slowly in darkness. Whether used often or only occasionally, the Iron Maiden became a symbol of what execution was meant to be. Not a swift end, but an extended nightmare. The rack, however, was all too real. A wooden frame with rollers at both ends, it stretched the victim's body until joints popped, ligaments tore, and bones dislocated with sickening cracks. Limbs could be stretched so far that arms and legs were torn from their sockets, leaving the victim permanently crippled even if released. The rack was not always fatal, but it prepared the body for death, softening the prisoner's will and making execution a welcome release. Torture and execution blurred together. Suffering was not just punishment, it was the process itself. But the most feared punishments were reserved for traitors, those who betrayed king or country. None was more infamous than being hanged, drawn, and quartered in medieval England. The condemned was dragged to the gallows on a wooden frame, jeered at by the crowd. They were hanged, but not killed, cut down, while still gasping for air. Their stomach was then slit open, their intestines pulled out and burned before their eyes, their heart ripped from their chest and held aloft for all to see. Only then did the final act arrive. The body was hacked into 4 pieces, the head displayed on a spike as a warning to all who dared defy authority. It was not execution alone. It was a complete obliteration of the traitor's body, honor, and memory. And yet, Europe still devised worse. In France, heretics were often punished by burning at the stake. Fire was seen as a holy purifier, consuming the sinful body in cleansing flames. But burning was not quick. The condemned was bound to a wooden pole, straw piled at their feet. When the fire was lit, smoke choked their lungs before the flames seared their flesh. Victims writhed and screamed as fire crawled up their legs, blistering skin, until they collapsed, blackened and unrecognizable. To the church, this was not cruelty. It was salvation, the fire cleansing the soul even as it destroyed the body. Some punishments were so bizarre they border on the surreal. In Scandinavia, a method called the blood eagle was said to be performed on traitors. The ribs hacked open, the lungs pulled out and spread like wings across the victim's back. Historians debate whether this was truly practiced or only a legend. But the fact that people believed it tells us everything about the medieval world, where cruelty itself was as much a weapon as the sword. What unites all these horrors is not just their brutality, but their purpose. These executions were not hidden in prisons or carried out in secret chambers. They were public, they were performances, and every scream, every convulsion, every drop of blood was part of a message that echoed through the crowd. Obey, or this will be you. Behind the cruelty of medieval execution lies a truth darker than the punishments themselves. These horrors were not simply designed to kill, they were designed to rule. In a world where monarchs ruled by divine right and the church claimed authority over souls, pain became the ultimate language of power. Every time a body was broken, burned, or torn apart, it sent a message to the living. Resist, and this will be you. The church in particular wielded the spectacle of execution with terrifying precision. Heresy was not just a crime, it was treason against God, and the only cure the church claimed was fire. Burning was not chosen at random. In the medieval imagination, fire purified. Flames destroyed the flesh, but cleansed the soul. A brutal contradiction that allowed priests to watch men and women scream in agony while convincing themselves they were saving them. One of the most famous cases is that of Joan of Arc. In 1431, she was tied to a stake in Rouen, condemned as a heretic for claiming God spoke to her. Chroniclers recorded that she begged for a cross as the flames rose around her. An English soldier hastily made a small wooden cross from the stake itself and held it before her eyes. Witnesses said her cries of pain mingled with prayers until her voice finally vanished beneath the roar of fire. To the church, this was justice. To the people, it was theater. Thousands came to watch. A saint was burned alive, and history never forgot it. But Joan was not alone. Across Europe, witches, heretics, and dissenters met the same fate. In Spain, during the height of the Inquisition, public burnings known as autos da fe became grand ceremonies. Whole plazas were filled with processions of chained prisoners in penitential robes, priests chanting, and finally the lighting of the pyres. It was not merely punishment, it was ritual, a fusion of religion and terror meant to bind society together through shared fear. For traitors, the spectacle was equally dreadful. The execution of William Wallace in 1305 shows how far medieval rulers would go to obliterate not just a man, but the very idea of rebellion. Dragged through the streets of London, Wallace was hanged, cut down alive, disemboweled, and his heart ripped out before his eyes. Chroniclers wrote that the executioner held the still-beating organ aloft and declared, "Behold the heart of a traitor." His body was then quartered, his limbs sent to 4 corners of the kingdom as warnings. Wallace's suffering was not only for him, it was a performance for all of Scotland and England to witness, a demonstration that betrayal against the crown would be repaid with horror beyond imagination. Execution was also a communal experience. On the day of punishment, townspeople flooded the square. Merchants sold bread and ale. Children perched on their fathers' shoulders. Execution Day was both terror and carnival, a grim holiday where death became spectacle. One German traveler in the 16th century described the crowd at a burning as so thick that not even a sparrow could pass through. Some came out of morbid fascination, others out of fear, but all came because the execution was as much a part of medieval life as church on Sunday. Pain, suffering, and death were public, not hidden away as they are now. Executions were even staged with deliberate choreography. Chroniclers describe executioners addressing the crowd, priests offering final prayers, and criminals forced to confess loudly before their deaths. The condemned were not simply punished, they were actors in a ritual drama. Their final words were seen as omens, their final moments lessons for all. If a criminal died bravely, it was whispered that perhaps he had been innocent. If he screamed and cursed, it was proof that God's judgment had been just. The audience interpreted every cry, every twitch, as signs of divine will. The fascination with cruelty also had a political dimension. A king's power was not truly secure until it was displayed in blood. Executions of rebels, in particular, were staged as a deliberate warning. In France, after failed uprisings, entire groups of peasants were broken on the wheel one after another, their bodies left to rot as crows picked their bones. Chroniclers note that travelers sometimes passed entire fields filled with skeletal remains, silent monuments to rebellion crushed by fear. The message was clear: order is maintained not by love, but by terror. And yet, even in all this darkness, there were contradictions. The same church that ordered burnings also preached forgiveness. The same kings who ordered quarterings also staged grand feasts. Ordinary villagers who cheered at hangings also wept when neighbors were condemned. Execution was not just cruelty imposed from above, it was a mirror of society itself, revealing both its fears and its desires. By the late Middle Ages, doubts began to creep in. Some scholars and priests questioned whether such cruelty was truly godly. Was it necessary to watch a woman burn for hours to prove her guilt? Was tearing a man apart limb by limb really justice? Or was it vengeance dressed in law? Slowly, the seeds of change began to grow. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment brought a new view of the body and the soul. By the 18th century, torture and spectacle were increasingly seen as barbaric relics. The guillotine, though feared, was introduced in France as a humane alternative, swift and clean. Execution did not vanish, but the theater of suffering began to fade. Yet the memory of medieval punishments lingers. The words themselves, rack, wheel, stake, quartering, still send chills centuries later. They are remembered not only because they happened, but because they reveal something uncomfortable about humanity. These horrors were not carried out by monsters alone. They were demanded, attended, even enjoyed by ordinary people. They were a part of community life, of faith, of politics. And that is the most disturbing truth. Cruelty was not an accident of the medieval world. It was the foundation of its order. Perhaps that is why we remain fascinated today. The thought of the wheel, the stake, or the rack horrifies us, yet we cannot look away. We tell ourselves we are more civilized, more humane, that executions are now hidden behind closed doors, sanitized, and clinical. But history whispers another truth. The human appetite for spectacle, for pain as power, has never truly disappeared. It has only changed its stage. The Middle Ages remind us of what society can become when justice is measured not in fairness, but in fear. When pain is not an accident, but a weapon. When death is not a sentence, but a show. And in that grim theater, the line between faith and fear, punishment and cruelty, law and horror disappears into the smoke of the pyre. If this journey into the horrors of medieval execution unsettled you, imagine how many more shadows history hides. From forgotten monarchs to unspeakable punishments, the past is filled with stories too disturbing to ignore. If you want to explore more tales buried in the darkness of history, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten, the macabre, and the untold.